So when I went last year to Palestine, it was my second trip to Palestine. I go there as part of the Protected Presence, and what we do is we go out with Palestinian farmers while they're on the olive harvest to witness if there's any attack by settlers, which does quite often happen, and hopefully our presence will deter them from attacking. But if it does happen, we then report that, we write it down, and we send it to the United Nations. And if I went, because the only way that you can get into Palestine is to actually go through Israeli customs. So if I went there and I said, oh, I'm going to help a Palestinian farmer pick olives, which just seems like something that is not really a very terrible thing to do, but I would just be sent straight home. So I have to go there and say I'm a tourist. So what happens is the people I go with, they all go there, say we're a tourist, and we meet up in Jerusalem. So this cafe here, cafe restaurant, is somewhere we often meet up and have a meal. It's in the Muslim quarter of Jerusalem, in the old city. And you can see just here is a station for Israeli soldiers. So in the Muslim quarter, they have quite a few stations where they have Israeli soldiers, and they quite often harass the local Palestinian population. So to look at the old city of Jerusalem, so this is the Muslim quarter, and the little square of that restaurant is just here in the Muslim quarter. This is the Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, and the Jewish quarter. Okay, so, oh sorry, going the wrong way. So when we arrived, it was the end of the Jewish celebration of Sukkot. So if you're in Jerusalem, where would be a good place to celebrate this Jewish celebration of Sukkot? Maybe the Jewish quarter. And they've got loads of really nice big squares. They've got this one. They've got the Western Wall Plaza with the Wailing Wall there. That's absolutely massive. They've got another big square here. But no, a group of Israelis decided that they were going to celebrate Sukkot in this little square, which I showed you before in the Muslim quarter. So I was there with some friends having a meal in the restaurant, and at the outpost, the post for the soldiers, just more and more soldiers started appearing. And then they started putting out these barriers, so they only left a very small pathway in front of the restaurant. As well as the soldiers, there was also the Israeli military police, so you can see one, oh sorry. Oh no, it doesn't.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm going the wrong way now.
maybe use it still on the laptop.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll just do it with that one. Yeah, so you can see on this Israeli military police, he's got what I think is tear gas canisters all the way around there as well. So so what happened was all these Jewish Israeli settlers, well Israelis from Jerusalem, came into this square to start celebrating Sukkot. So this was them arriving. Oh, what's happened?
Just use this one. It's easier.
Yeah,
Up and down.
I think I have to press that bit to play.
Oh, I see.
Because it's a video.
Is the cursor? It's a video, is it?
Yeah, I'll just go like. Yeah, there we go. So this was these Israelis arriving to celebrate Sukkot. Okay, so what happened is that sort of carried on till really late at night, gone midnight. They had their own PA system, so it was really loud. And as you can see, only the men were allowed to dance. The women aren't allowed to join in this celebration. So a lot of the women were sort of at the barrier on the side watching, and also Israeli soldiers. And so this tiny little path they put in front of the restaurant was absolutely blocked. It was filled with these people watching the celebration. And as time went on, they encroached onto the little terrace outside the restaurant. So the restaurant had to close down. They had no more customers that day because it was stopped by this. And right at the end of the celebration, they were waving Israeli flags around. So really, so it was so that it's fine that the Jewish people could celebrate Sukkot, but celebrating it in this tiny square in the Muslim quarter and waving Israeli flags was definitely a provocation. And also in the Muslim quarter, Israelis are buying up property, and when they buy up property, they hang Israeli flags outside. So on this same little square, on either side of the square, there are buildings that have been bought by Israelis and are flying flags. So we've got on one side we've got I think it's a Minerva, isn't it? This Jewish symbol, and this great big flag. And then on the other side, a couple of flags flying, and everywhere, all over Jerusalem, there are Israeli flags flying. I even had this tower block, had this massive great flag coming down the front of it. And I think it's actually illegal, they're not allowed to fly the Palestinian flag in Jerusalem. So anyway, after I left Jerusalem, I went to help in this village of Kafr Qudum, to help them pick their olives. And as you can see from the graffiti there, they have a real spirit of resistance. So this is Kafr Qudum just here, and this is Nablus, the nearest big city. And there's a road going from Kafr Qudum to Nablus. It takes about 15 minutes to get from Kafr Qudum to Nablus across here. But unfortunately, there's a settlement of Jit built across the road, and they have closed the road down. So now all the people of the village, they want to go to Nablus, they have to go up and around the top, and it takes over an hour. And they won't even let ambulances through on the old road. So this is where the old road is, where the barrier to stop people going through, and this is the settlement. And when you're in the West Bank, it's quite easy to tell which villages are settlements and which ones are the Palestinian villages. Or one thing, it's much more affluent, but the other thing is there's no tanks on the roofs here. So the Israeli have abundant supply of water. As we saw before, they quite often have swimming pools, whereas the Palestinians will only have a water supply for a few hours a day. So they all have to have tanks on their roofs so they can fill their tanks up while the water is actually running. Okay, so when we arrived in the village, we met up with our local contact, Saba, and he took us to a friend's house who told us all about every Friday they had a demonstration to say open the road. And this was a tear gas canister that somebody had picked up that had been used against one of those demonstrations. He also had this painting of his son who he said had been shot on one of the demonstrations. So I thought I'd try and find out a bit more about this. So I found the actual photo of the incident when his son got shot, and I also found a report by the International Solidarity Movement. So it happened in 2016. So it says 11-year-old shot in Kafr Qudum demonstration. The march began as usual and had progressed about 200 metres without seeing any soldiers. So it's not being able to see any soldiers, the children felt safe and decided to walk in front of the rest of the group. Shortly after the children had progressed to the front of the march, there was a sudden sound of live ammunition being fired. Khalid was hit almost immediately and fell to the ground whilst waving for help. During the time that Khalid was on the ground, the Israeli forces repeatedly threw sound bombs on the ground near him to deter Palestinians from helping whilst they tried to arrest him. A Palestinian man who saw Khalid in trouble, ran to the young man's aid through the heavy shooting of live ammunition. While he was pulling Khalid away, an Israeli sniper shot him in his thigh also. However, he managed to continue and successfully pull Khalid to a safer point where 2 other Palestinians were then able to help. So this is what happened on one of the demonstrations. So on these Friday demonstrations, usually soldiers will turn up. They might be just a few, there might be a lot. They might use blanks, they might use rubber bullets, they might use live ammunition. You just don't know. So it's all part of the intimidation. You go along and you don't know what they're going to be using on that day. Okay, another thing they often use is skunk water. And they'll go right up into the village and spray the houses with skunk water. If anybody's got a window open and this gets inside the house, it smells like raw sewage and it's impossible to get rid of the smell. So the other thing they use is tear gas and also sound bombs. So after we had this talk about the demonstration, a car arrived to take us to the place that we were staying, and in typical Palestinian style we said, hang on, there's 6 of us plus Saba have got to get into this car with the driver. We thought, we're not all going to fit in, but somehow we managed it. We had 2 people in the passenger seat in the front, 4 people sitting on the back seat with somebody across our laps. So it was like typical Palestinian, we will all get in the car. And this is where we stayed. It was the local council building, and it had wonderful views from the roof. So there were views across the olive fields. There was views across the rooftops of the village, and there was also a view of the outpost of a nearby settlement. Okay, so on the first day I went picking olives with this family. They were really nice. They had these wonderful 3-legged ladders, so that because we were on uneven ground, they worked really well. And the other alternative was to actually climb up into the tree to pick the olives. And we stopped for a tea break. We had sage tea, which they have in Palestine. It's really, really lovely. And the second day, we went to a place near the road where the demonstrations were to pick olives. And I took this photo, and then the farmer who was with us said, oh, don't take a photo of the settlement because they're watching us all the time. Somebody might come out and, this might cause trouble. So I didn't take any more photos. But this was something that happened all the time. So we might have soldiers near us or settlers doing something, but you couldn't take photos for fear of repercussions. So a lot of these sort of things you just couldn't take photos of. So I didn't take any more photos of the settlement. But as we walked along there, we found there were loads of, this is a tear gas, and this is a sound bomb canister that had been used on previous demonstrations. Okay, looking over the other side of the road, there are all these polytunnels on the Palestinian land. And in the settlement itself, they had this watchtower so they could watch their polytunnels. So looking closer at the polytunnels, you can see that all the rubbish from the polytunnels, they're just throwing out onto the Palestinian land. So this is a close-up of all this rubbish. And we went picking olives with a farmer near these polytunnels one day, and there were all these posts just in the ground. Some settler had, it's like they were marking out territory on the Palestinian farmer's land. So obviously the farmer was not too happy about that. So we had a little bit of direct action, and we managed to remove 3 of the posts. Okay, another time we were picking quite near the settlement. So this is the settlement, and this is Nablus in the distance. And when we were picking close to the settlement, we had to have a permit. So we were allowed to pick in this area for 3 days, with being watched by the soldiers. So in those 3 days, the farmers have to do everything. They're only allowed on their own land for 3 days a year, and they have to do all the pruning and everything as well as picking. But the good thing about them doing the pruning at this time is that when they chop off a branch, you can just take the branch, sit down in the shade and pick the olives. Because the other alternative is going up a ladder in the hot sun and picking the olives from the top of the trees. Okay, so we also went to the demonstration on the Friday. So this is one of the people who was with me picking the olives, and he met a friend from London who was volunteering with another organisation, the Women's Peace Corps. And on the Friday demonstration, so a lot of people who are volunteering in various organisations in Palestine come to help on the demonstration. So there's also people from ISM as well. So the demonstration started with a few tyres being set on fire by the Palestinians, and then the army arrived. Lucky for us, it was just one jeep, and there were about 4 or 5 soldiers. They did fire at us, but they were firing blanks luckily that day, so we were safe. Okay, everybody joins in on the demonstration, so even the children bringing tyres to help, and volunteers. Okay, so on while we were waiting for the permit to pick in Kafr Qudum, we went to another village because we were waiting for them to get their permits, and they also had about 3 days to pick their olives because it was near to a settlement. So this is village was Asawiya, and this guy Arafat we picked with him and his family, and the soldiers there said, we said, can we take any photos? They said, no, you can't take any photos of us or the settlement. I said, what about, can we take pictures of each other? So they said, okay. So I took this picture of Arafat, but oops, there's a settlement in the background. I accidentally took that as well. And a nice picture of the donkey, and oops, look, there's a outpost as well in the background there. This was lovely green part of the olive field. It's lovely and green because there's raw sewage going there from the settlement. We had to cross this sort of rather smelly little river to get to the olive trees. So this is the olives that we picked, being put in the bag at the end of the day, and then it was all put on the donkey so we could take them away. Okay, so the next day we went to another place to pick olives, but it was outside another settlement near Asawiya. And in the past, there's a road going to the settlement. If you picked olives below that road, the settler security wouldn't come out and give you any trouble. If you picked above the road, then they would come out. But there were new settler security in this village, in this settlement, and we were picking just below the road, and this guy arrived and stopped just up the road from us, got out his car, gun over his shoulder, and just stayed there and watched us. Then another one came and he stopped, and he was just above us on the road, again with his gun. And then some soldiers arrived, and this guy who was just above us started saying, "You've got 5 minutes to leave or you'll be in trouble." So we kind of just ignored him. We thought, this is our land, not a soldier or anything. He said that he kept saying this for about 5 minutes, and then he started counting down 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. And then the soldiers came down and they said, "Oh, we can't stay here any longer, so we can't keep the peace. So you've got to leave." So they made us, the Palestinians, leave their land. And who were these really threatening Palestinians who had to leave? So they were the children. So there was this guy and these 2 children. Arafat and his brother were busy, they couldn't come that day. So there was Arafat's sister and his elderly father. So these were the threatening Palestinians. Okay, so Arafat and his family invited us back to their home. We had a lovely meal there, and they had this really interesting oven in their garden. So it's got coals in the middle, and then it's built up around the outside with earth and ash, and then that's the lid that goes on top. Okay, so after I finished on the olive harvest, I went and travelled around Palestine a little bit. So I went to the Waldorf Hotel, advertised as the hotel with the worst view of the world, because it's right next to the wall. And they've got a piano bar in there, which has got a few nice, interesting features. So I like this with the CCTV cameras. They also had some books, so the history of the English-speaking people, because obviously we're the most important. And a nice picture of a bulldozer. They also had a museum at the back of the hotel. So they had a really nice timeline of things that happened in Palestine. And they had some sort of really visual images to show things that had happened. So this was representing Operation Protective Edge when they attacked Gaza. And it's showing, this is showing the number of Palestinians killed and the number of Israelis, to just put it in proportion. And also they're using the old Jewish proverb of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So these scales were representing the Palestinians killed compared to the Israelis killed in teeth. So another good visual display was they had something about all the house demolitions. So when people had the house demolished, they might be given 30 minutes to leave. So if you were told you had to leave your house and you had 30 minutes, what would you take with you? So this suitcase was representing that. Also upstairs at the Waldorf Hotel, there was an art gallery, all Palestinian artists. So this was one of the paintings I particularly liked. And outside as well, there's a wall, which is another art gallery. So on the wall, there's graffiti by international artists and Palestinian artists. So I quite like this one. And this was another one I really liked, because I like the symbolism of the key, the symbol of the right to return, and the kafir. Okay, I also went to aid a refugee camp in Bethlehem, and I did this through the Waldorf Hotel. They arranged trips, and our guide was somebody who was born and lived in aid a refugee camp, so he knew all about it. So there's a bit of graffiti Handler there. Do people know about Handler, the sign of resistance in Palestine? And there was a really lovely mural on the wall by the refugee camp. So this is the other half of it. And this is really close to people's homes. So this watchtower here actually looked into people's homes. And as you can imagine, they weren't really too pleased with this. So you can see it's very dark down here because people quite often light fires at the bottom to try and get rid of it. And they've also got a massive key there to represent the right to return. This is the children's play area. And here, and this is a watchtower just here. And there's nets over the play area because the soldiers in the watchtower throw rocks, and they tear gas canisters at the children in the playground. They also have fired live ammunition at them. And this is just to the left of the children's play area, and here we've got a gate in the wall. So this gate can only be opened from the Israeli side. So they do sometimes open it, and they'll come and raid the refugee camp. So also in Bethlehem they had a nice museum of olive presses. So they had a couple of old style olive presses. So they were really nice. There was this one, and it's more a Weiss one. And then I went to Ramallah, and I went to the Palestine Museum in Ramallah. It's just on the outskirts of Ramallah, and it was only opened last year, the building itself has won awards for its design, and in the gardens they've just got indigenous plants from Palestine and a lot of sculptures. So this was one of my favourite sculptures in the garden. And inside they had an exhibition about Jerusalem. So they were saying that the Dome of the Rock was really iconic. You know, they have it everywhere. So even on this little stall, he's got a picture of it on his sign. And also they had models, so this model in beads. So that's the end of my slideshow, but I would recommend anybody go to Palestine. Yeah, either you can go, there's lots of different volunteer organisations you can go with, or going as a tourist. You know, there's lots of interesting places to go, like Bethlehem and Ramallah, and you're giving money to the Palestinian economy, so, and you're seeing for yourself what's actually happening. Okay.